The battle for Hill 32-34 stands as a symbol of valor, endurance, and the ultimate test of willpower in one of the most intense and heroic last stands in military history. Fought during the Soviet-Afghan War, it took place on January 7 to 8, 1988, when a small contingent of Soviet airborne soldiers, numbering only 39 men, faced off against a force of more than 200 Mujahideen fighters. This clash unfolded on a remote, snow-covered hilltop in Afghanistan's Paktia province, near the Pakistan border, as part of a broader Soviet campaign to regain control of vital supply routes. Despite overwhelming odds, brutal winter conditions, and an enemy determined to dislodge them, the Soviet soldiers held their position through grit, strategy, and sheer determination. The battle has since been etched into history as a legendary tale of survival and sacrifice. The Soviet-Afghan War, 1979–1989, was a protracted conflict in which the Soviet Union intervened to support the communist government of Afghanistan against a growing insurgency by the Mujahideen. Backed by external powers such as the United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and other Western allies, the Mujahideen fighters waged a relentless guerrilla war against Soviet forces. This conflict not only drained Soviet resources but also became an international battleground in the Cold War. By the late 1980s, the war was proving to be a costly quagmire for the Soviets. Soviet forces, though technologically superior and well-equipped, found it increasingly difficult to navigate Afghanistan's harsh terrain and to counter the Mujahideen's hit-and-run tactics. This was a war fought in the mountains, deserts, and villages, where traditional military tactics often proved ineffective. The Mujahideen, fighting for their homeland and bolstered by advanced Western-supplied weapons like Stinger missiles and RPGs, could blend into the local population or disappear into the mountains, only to strike again when least expected. In November 1987, Soviet commanders launched Operation Magistral, a crucial effort to reopen the strategic road from Gardez to Khost, a key supply route that had been cut off for months by the Mujahideen. Khost, a city near the Pakistani border, had become a stronghold for Mujahideen forces led by Jalaluddin Haqqani, one of the most formidable and respected leaders of the insurgency. His forces had surrounded the city, preventing Soviet supply lines from reaching it. The Soviet objective was clear: regain control of this critical route and break the siege of Khost. Hill 32-34, standing 3,234 meters above sea level, became a focal point of this operation. Overlooking the crucial road from Gardez to Khost, the hill provided a commanding view of the surrounding area. Control of this position would allow Soviet forces to protect their convoys from Mujahideen ambushes, ensuring the safe movement of troops and supplies. For the Mujahideen, capturing this hill would give them a strategic vantage point from which to harass Soviet movements and maintain control of the region. Thus, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. In late December 1987, the 9th Company of the 345th Independent Guards Airborne Regiment, under the command of Colonel Valery Vostradin, was deployed to Hill 32-34. This company of just 39 men was tasked with holding the hill and fortifying the position. Despite their small numbers, the men of the 9th Company were experienced, having fought in Afghanistan for several years. They understood the terrain and had become adept at mountain warfare. Immediately upon arriving, the soldiers began preparing the defenses. They dug trenches and bunkers, laid barbed wire, and placed mines around the perimeter to fortify the hilltop. The hill was rugged, surrounded by steep ridges and narrow valleys, making it difficult to defend but also challenging for an attacker. The Soviet troops knew they would face a fierce battle. Intelligence reports indicated that a large Mujahideen force was gathering nearby, planning to launch an assault to dislodge them from the hill. The attack came at 3:30 p.m. on January 7, 1988. The Mujahideen, numbering between 200 and 250 fighters, launched their assault from two directions. They were well armed with recoilless rifles, RPGs, and automatic weapons, many supplied by Western powers. The first wave came in hard, using recoilless guns to pound Soviet positions, while RPGs aimed at breaching the defenses. Despite this barrage, the Soviet soldiers held firm. Lieutenant Viktor Gagarin, commander of the 1st Platoon, directed Soviet artillery fire with precision. Their well-coordinated response caused heavy casualties among the Mujahideen attackers. Yet, this was only the beginning. The Mujahideen quickly regrouped and launched another attack, advancing under cover of heavy fire. This time, they pressed closer, using the cover of the mountainous terrain to inch their way toward Soviet positions. The small Soviet force held the line, repelling wave after wave of attackers. Machine gun positions, strategically placed along the ridgeline, mowed down advancing Mujahideen fighters. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Soviet paratroopers' skill and discipline allowed them to repel each successive assault. However, as the hours wore on, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Ammunition began to run low, and the freezing temperatures made even basic tasks difficult. The extreme cold, which dipped as low as -30 degrees Celsius, caused water supplies to freeze solid, and the soldiers were forced to drink melted snow. Ammunition had to be carefully managed, with soldiers using their bodies to insulate artillery shells and prevent them from freezing. As the night wore on, the Mujahideen launched a final, desperate wave. This time, they came closer than ever before, breaching Soviet defenses and engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat with the defenders. The Soviet paratroopers, exhausted and nearly out of ammunition, fought with everything they had: bayonets, knives, even their bare hands. In the chaos of close-quarters combat, the Soviets used their superior training and resolve to push the attackers back once again. Despite their small numbers, the Soviet soldiers demonstrated remarkable bravery and resilience. Even as casualties mounted, they refused to give ground. The Mujahideen, frustrated by their inability to capture the hill, grew more desperate, sending wave after wave of attackers into the Soviet defenses. Each time, they were met with fierce resistance. Finally, as dawn approached on January 8, Soviet reinforcements arrived. Soviet Mi-24 Hind helicopters, armed with rockets and machine guns, swooped in to provide much-needed air support. These gunships strafed the Mujahideen positions, providing covering fire for the beleaguered troops on the hilltop. In addition, helicopters dropped much-needed ammunition and supplies and evacuated the wounded. The arrival of air support marked the turning point in the battle. The Mujahideen, unable to withstand the combined firepower of the Soviet ground forces and air support, began to retreat. By midday on January 8, the battle was over. The Mujahideen, having suffered heavy casualties, abandoned their assault. Soviet estimates suggest that more than 200 Mujahideen fighters were killed during the battle, leaving behind a significant amount of weapons and equipment. The Soviet paratroopers, though victorious, had paid a high price. Of the 39 soldiers who had defended the hill, 6 were killed, and 28 were wounded, leaving only 5 men unscathed. 2 of the fallen soldiers, Vyacheslav Alexandrovich Alexandrov and Andrei Alexandrovich Melnikov, were posthumously awarded the prestigious Golden Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union for their extraordinary bravery. Every soldier who fought in the battle received honors, including the Order of the Red Banner and the Order of the Red Star, in recognition of their courage. The battle for Hill 32-34 became a symbol of Soviet determination and the resilience of their soldiers, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a tactical victory for the Soviet Union, demonstrating that their forces could still hold key positions despite the challenges of fighting in Afghanistan. However, while the battle was a significant morale booster, it did not alter the overall course of the war. The Soviet-Afghan War continued to grind on for another year, draining Soviet resources and contributing to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought at Hill 32-34 have since become part of military legend. Their stand has been compared to other famous last stands in history, such as the Battle of Thermopylae and the defense of Stalingrad, where a small force held out against a vastly superior enemy. The battle for Hill 32-34 remains one of the most dramatic and poignant episodes of the Soviet-Afghan War, a tale of courage under fire, relentless determination, and the will to survive against impossible odds.